Disclaimer. I am a law student, and the legal information provided is not legal advice. For that, please hire an attorney. Hi! Let's begin with a hypothetical. Or rather, a couple hypotheticals. They're going to be a little simple, but I promise there's some interesting ideas that I want to tease out. So, oh yeah, new intro. Hooray. Let's say that you have, let's say a high schooler, all right? And let's say that every morning, or just about every morning, this high schooler gets up and as part of her morning routine, brushes her teeth, right? Pretty normal thing. Most of us brush our teeth in the morning. That's a routine practice that this high school student does, all right? So that's the first part of the hypothetical. The second part is, now let's say that another part of this high school student's morning routine is that every day when they go to the bus stop, that there's another high school student, someone who's a little more meek, not as popular, doesn't really stand up for themselves. And let's say that in some way, every morning, the person that we're talking about, the high school girl, bullies the other person. All right? A couple questions from there. The first question is, does the fact that this high school girl does these things every morning mean that it is with a certainty that she will continue to do these things in the future? All right? Secondly, if it's not certain, how likely is it that she'll do these things in the future? And third, is there a meaningful difference between the first routine practice and the second one? But yeah, so Blair White put out this video about Trump and the trans community, all right? She has some pretty interesting opinion. She says a lot of things in here. We're just going to go through and address them on the merits so that if Blair actually watches this later, and Blair, you want to talk to me about it, I'm not going to like try and morally impugn you. I'm not going to try and like throw you under the bus or whatever. All right. I'm not going to morally impugn you. All right. I'm just going to evaluate what you say on the merits of it so that we can have an honest discussion. All right. Cool. Let's begin.
Do you want to be in the video? Want to be in the
and I'm
video?
going at 1.5 because I'm not listening to you at normal speed.
Okay, let's see if Angela wants to be in it. Oh, now she's mad. Mom, stop! Jeez, leave him alone. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone's staying safe out there. So today's video is on a topic that you guys ask me to discuss all the time, and I've definitely dragged my feet a little bit in doing it, not because I've been pessimistic about politics. I feel like I've more so been nihilistic about politics, which is crazy because I feel like I used to always say nihilism was like intellectual laziness and just feeling like everything sucks is just an excuse to not talk about fixing things. But I relate to it now. Lately, especially, I felt like everything political just sucks and I can't add to it, but this is something I can't.
Also, wait, aren't you primarily a political channel? You do like conservative content like all the time. I don't know. This just feels like a weird, like, I don't know.
Add to. So let's talk about Trump and the trans community. Disclaimer, this is a video that you're probably not going to grasp my full opinion unless you watch the entire thing. This is one of those videos I also want to do kind of chronological. Like I want to start at the beginning of the Trump presidency until
all right, we're going to watch the entirety of it
now and discuss everything. So before we do this very deep dive, I am so excited to announce that this video is sponsored by Surfshark.
Don't care, getting by it. I'm sorry, we're not watching your advert. Sorry, not happening.
About transgender people, I'll get into that. But first, we're gonna get into what has been really frustrating for me the entire presidency, which has been, I feel like transgenderism by both sides has been used as a political football.
Transgenderism. Blair, if you have any degree of like social awareness, it's not a great term. It's like not used by the medical or scientific community. It's not.
Whenever it's convenient. And you know, I stand by what I have always said, which is that transgenderism is not to be politicized. It is to be medicalized. It is to be treated as a medical issue, not a political talking point.
Okay, hold on. So again, I don't want to stop before you get into the merits of the argument. When you say this, on one hand, I'm inclined to agree with you. I am. All right. except that the way this usually manifests is when people try to medicalize it in a very particular way that actually isn't scientific. Like, for example, the whole discussion on dysphoria or like trans medicalism. That's an appeal of this argument, and technically I feel like you're leaving the door open because, like, from what I understand, you are a trans medicalist, but understand that's not, like, those beliefs, which are commonly attributed to trans medicalism, are not the majority scientific consensus on those opinions, right? Actually, before we get too deep into it, right? Is dysphoria required to be transgender? So, like, according to the UK, hold on, we'll make this in the center so people can read this. According to the UK's National Health Service, many people with gender dysphoria have a strong, lasting desire to live a life that matches or expresses their gender identity, and do this by changing the way that they look and behave. But the NHS also says that some people with gender dysphoria, but not all, may want to use hormones and sometimes surgery to express their gender identity. And I believe also in the DSM-5 that it specifically says that only some, but not all people who have gender dysphoria, or trans people actually have gender dysphoria, right? Like, it's not a strict requirement under modern health standards, right? And that's pretty easy to understand why, you know? Like, there's a lot of people who I've interviewed on my channel who have specifically talked about the fact that they discovered that they were trans not by virtue of the fact that they had dysphoria, but rather that they experimented with their gender presentation and found sort of like a euphoria from presenting in a different way than how they were assigned at birth. It's a different way of figuring it out, but it's logically valid and sound all the same, right? And so I only say all of that, right? I don't want to get too deep into a tangent, but like when you say that like trans identity shouldn't be politicized and should be focused on like medical consensus, on the principle of that, I agree. On the principle of it, I do agree. The problem is when you try to like medicalize it in a way that fits your or a particular political narrative, even if it's not stated explicitly, and you end up actually ignoring larger scientific consensus. That's the issue.
So you can imagine the past 4 years have been a little bit frustrating for me. What I've noticed since 2016 is that every 6 months or so, there's some new, very scary sounding, very shocking trans headline. And it is always something to the effect of all.
Let's go through some of these really quick. Controversial Trump administration ban on transgender troops going to, yep, we'll talk about that. Trump administration erases transgender civil rights protection help. Yep, that's the thing that happened. We'll talk about that. Transgender could be defined out of it. Yep, and HRC response to Trump administration. I don't know as much about this, but there are other things that we'll talk about, Shirley.
Our rights are being stripped, our lives are in danger, and the trans community, like I said, every 6 months.
From psychiatry.org, gender dysphoria is not the same as gender nonconformity, which refers to behaviors not matching the gender norms or stereotypes of gender. Yeah, gender. Yeah, like it's not a mental disorder. Hold on, are people actually unironically believing that? Hold on, we have more information on that. Is being transgender a mental disorder? According to the American Psychological Association, a psychological state is considered a mental disorder only if it causes significant distress or disability. Many transgender people do not experience their gender as distressing or disabling, which implies that identifying as transgender does not constitute a mental disorder. For these individuals, the significant problem is finding affordable resources such as counseling, hormone therapy, medical procedures, and the social support necessary to freely express their gender identity and minimize discrimination. Many other obstacles may lead to distress, including a lack of acceptance within society, direct or indirect experiences with discrimination or assault. These experiences may lead many transgender people to suffer with anxiety, depression, or related disorders at higher rates than non-transgender persons. Furthermore, in 2019, the World Health Organization stopped classifying transgender people as having a mental disorder. The analysis is that being transgender does not inherently mean that one may experience significant distress or disability, and causes for experiencing that is often related to societal issues. Furthermore, is not classified as a mental disorder by the WHO. The conclusion that being transgender is not a mental disorder, right? Like, it's not. I don't know why people were talking about that in the comments, but it's just not. And if you maintain that belief, then, like, all right, then you're just being anti-science. I don't know what to tell you.
Because of these stories, just goes into complete hysteria and panic mode. And it actually started with the election itself. On the day of the election, there was a story ran that after he won, it was either 8 or 10 transgender children committed suicide.
Yeah, so from what I understand, because I watched this before talking about this, right? I've got a lot of research that we're going to be talking about. from what I understand, she's going to talk about how apparently this was falsified. I can't confirm or deny whether or not it was true. So I'm essentially just giving her this one as a pass.
Huge trans influencers like Gigi Gorgeous and really every single other one made videos about it, ran with it like it was true.
8 transgender kids had committed suicide. I was, like, my stomach, I just got goosebumps, like my stomach turned.
And it was actually scary even for me.
From the DSM-5, you need to have at least 2 of the last 6 months diagnosed with dysphoria. Oh yeah, okay, that's awesome. I'm gonna need to update my doc with DSM-5, but yeah, so basically under the DSM-5, it's more like a factored analysis, right? For people who are unfamiliar with like the difference between a factor and an elements-based analysis, an elements-based analysis is something where you need to have like a certain set of elements in order to be able to come to a certain conclusion. That would be like saying, you know, like an elements-based rule for being trans would be like, in order to be trans, you have to have dysphoria, you need to have experienced it for a long time, and you, I don't know, some other nebulous third element, right? Like, and you would need to meet all of those completely 100% in order to qualify as being trans. But that's not what's in the DSM-5. What's in the DSM-5 is more factor-based, where it's like, here are the main factors that are commonly seen in trans people. Some of them, or like a good number of them, should be present in most people who identify as trans, but not necessarily all of them, and some may be more present than others, right? It's more like just evaluating the totality of the circumstances when coming to a conclusion, as opposed to like looking to check off certain boxes on the checklist, right? That's basically how the DSM-5 handles it.
The trans community was rightfully horrified because obviously if that were true, that's an insane, horrible tragedy. The problem is that it was 100,000% false. It was so false that GLAAD had to come out a few days later and say that we shouldn't be spreading that because it's completely unverified and completely untrue. In fact, it was one verified Twitter user that said it and said they had a private source confirming it, and suddenly it was being reported as fact.
Yeah, again, I'm just giving her this. I don't know enough about the circumstances or the specifics, but like I really don't care as much about it because like it's not like something that Trump specifically did, even if it did happen. Like, yeah, it's terrible if it were true. But I'm more concerned with like the actual actions of Trump and his administration.
So to me, that was the beginning of the politicization of trans issues in the last 4 years, was that right there in the beginning. So let's jump forward to...
I mean, I'm not sure if that's it necessarily. I mean, like, even if that wasn't true, like, people, I think that it was largely that people were concerned that he was going to go on to do the things that he did, which, I mean, like, again, like, regardless of whether or not that story specifically was true, like, I think that given what he has done, and we will talk about it more, I am sure, those fears were probably justified, right? Like, yeah, he's not exactly the biggest LGBT ally, and he has done a lot of shitty stuff to the trans community, and we will talk about it more.
2017, the Trump military ban, trans military ban.
Yep.
So this was the beginning of actual policy decisions being made by the administration about trans people. I understand the argument in which it is not ideal for trans people to serve in certain capacities, the front lines, very specific.
Hold on. So let's be clear about this. All right, this is the first thing that I noticed, because she's basically making an argument that, like, okay, so I understand the idea that, like, we shouldn't allow trans people to serve on certain lines. Again, I'm not adopting that argument at all, right? I think that's actually kind of ridiculous. But what's more ridiculous is that it's just not representative, because the reason that they gave, I want people to remember, the reason the Trump administration gave for the ban, get out of here, was, that they take a massive amount of drugs. Basically, he just cited the idea, or he just like he just made up this idea that trans people take so many drugs and it's so expensive to have them in the military that it just wasn't worth it. All right? They take massive amounts of drugs. The president said they have to, and you're not allowed to take drugs. You're in the military, you're not allowed to take any drugs. The president went on to say that if a military member took aspirin following a medical procedure, they would have to break rules and regulations in order to have that. The first major thing is that Trump is incorrect that drug use in the military ban is prohibited, right? Like, it's just wrong, you know? And then going beyond that, it's actually pretty funny because a lot of people were very quick to point out that the military spends 5 times as much on Viagra as it would on transgender troops' medical care. When the military cares more about your penis than civil rights, yikes. What can I say but yikes? So yeah, let's look at some specifics, right? The implication is that even in the most extreme scenario that we are able to identify, we would expect only a 0.13%, 8.4 million out of 6.2 billion in their budget increase in healthcare spending. By contrast, total military spending on erectile dysfunction medicines amount to 84 million annually, according to an analysis by the Military Times. 10 times the cost of annual transition-related medical care for active duty transgender service members. The reason why this is relevant, people, is because, let's be clear, this argument has no water. This is just like this was just vaguely thrown out by the Trump administration because, let's be real, they just wanted to discriminate against trans people. Trump just wanted to keep trans people out of the military, and he felt like this was the best way he could do it. He has the most control over the military comparative to like other branches of government or other things which are within the purview of government, and he wanted to take a shot at trans people. That's it. That's it. So, you know, Blair, this argument about what do you call it? This argument that like transgender service people shouldn't like be serving on the front lines, that wasn't something which was evaluated or considered by the Trump administration at all. They gave like a vague reasoning that it was too expensive to have trans people in, and even that flops on its face. It was just discrimination. That's it. And I would say that's a pretty yikes take, right? A pretty not great thing for our president to do to us. Personally, that's just me. That's just my opinion. What am I to think? I'm just a C-rank political YouTuber.
Example. I think the reliance on trans-specific medication, hormones, obviously, and the fact that often they are placed in countries where they're very vulnerable because they are trans. Like, think about, I don't know, like me fighting in Iran. Like what? Like,
well, yeah, you aren't going to be fight. I mean, I assume that like, you know, we're not going to be having like, I don't know, like people. Like Beverly Hill girls going and signing up for the military, right? Like, just to give you an idea, like I was going to sign up, like actually some background for people who are watching. Originally, I was going to be a JAG lawyer. I was going to go in and like, you know, I was pretty strong. You know, I played college and high school sports. I was pretty tough. I was pretty durable. I could have gone in and done it. And I'd make the case I would do just as well, if not better than anyone else on the front lines, damn it. I want to be on the front lines. Fuck you. You aren't speaking for me. And I'm sorry, I don't want to be like again, like I'm trying to treat you as in good faith. I'm assuming I'm following Calvin, and I'm assuming you are a good person. But like, that does not speak for me. I would be just as fine, if not better, than other people going to serve on the front lines. So don't try to make this excuse generally for all trans people, because it certainly does not speak for me.
Obviously, in countries where it's illegal or dangerous, that can compromise the effectiveness of certain operations by having a trans person in the mix. I did feel, however, that banning them under any and every capacity, we're talking cooks, we're talking medics and doctors.
Again, like, all right, I think that she's going to be saying that, like, she is against it. And, like, okay, cool. But, like, this argument that, like, they should be allowed in certain capacities and others, it doesn't even fall in line with the logic that, like, the Trump administration themselves put forward. And beyond that, like, I still disagree with it on its merits, right? Yeah.
And, you know, coders, like there are a lot of positions in the military that are not directly on the front lines fighting. In fact, the overwhelming majority of them are not. And I just can't think of a reason why a trans person couldn't be like a cook, or if they're a talented nurse, you know? Having said all that, there is something to be said for the fact that the military denies people joining for a lot of reasons, and a lot of those reasons may even seem silly. Like if you have even the slightest bit of anxiety, you cannot be in the military. If you have not great eyesight, you cannot be in the military.
Yeah, but like, that's not really an argument. It's basically saying, oh yeah, because the military denies you on the basis of some things, they can deny you on others. There's a basis for denial on those other reasons, right? And it goes to whether or not you can serve in an adequate capacity. Mind you, the military, like if we're talking about like mental capacity or mental stability, like the military already does mental evaluations on every person going in, regardless of whether or not they are trans or otherwise LGBT, to make sure that they are fit for service. We already do that. So there's really no other reason why we should prohibit trans people from being in the military, right? Like they already like if I was to go into the military, I would have been psychologically evaluated. And if I was cleared, then like, what's the problem? What is otherwise the problem? My eyesight's perfect. I actually had LASIK eye surgery. Actually, I don't know if that technically disqualifies me. I think it does, but like maybe that, like if they took me out for that reason, then fine. But like otherwise, like I'm in peak physical health, right? Like I would have been fine. So there's no reason to say, oh, because they could have discriminated on you on one basis, or they could have kept you out for one basis, they could keep you out for others if they're completely arbitrary. Like, that's just kind of a non-argument. Thanks for the subscription. Appreciate it.
If you have gauges in your ears, tattoos in certain places, if you are overweight, depression, OCD, none of those things you can join the military with. They will deny you. And so to me, thinking, you know, I understand how crippling gender dysphoria is. So I actually do understand the argument that that would be something that would hurt the effectiveness of
Again, that's not even the argument that they made, and I disagree with that on the merits. Already talked about it.
people in the military. So, you know, I feel like if someone were to pay me to debate both sides, like, Blair, here's, I don't know, $500, like, debate why trans people should be allowed in the military indefinitely, I could do that. If someone was like, Blair, here's $500 to debate why they should never be in, I could probably do that too. It's very much a gray area of a topic. But honestly,
It's really not. I'm sorry to tell y'all, but it's really not. And Blair, I'm sorry, like, this is a problem of a lot of political discourse, is that people will often try to frame like vague questions as like, oh, I'm just gonna, you know, both sides are valid, right? Both sides have some weight to them. But oftentimes that's really not that true. And often it just shows that like the people who are saying that just don't know as much about the particular subjects, right? I've explained in depth why, I mean, the things that you said are either wrong or misrepresentative of what's actually happened. The argument is why trans people should be allowed in the military is pretty clear. And the reason why they were excluded is also pretty clear. They just discriminated against trans people. Boom. It's not hard.
I felt like it was way too sweeping, like I said. So let's jump to early 2018. The next big trans headline was that Trump was forcing the CDC to ban the word transgender from any and all documents. There are other words.
There were a couple of these. I'm going to be talking about one in particular. I can't remember if this is specifically the thing I'm thinking of. If it is, we'll talk about it. If not, then I'll just give it to her.
Allegedly being banned, but this is obviously about the trans stuff. This was completely fake, like 110% fake.
Okay.
This did not happen. CNN has come out and said this did not happen, but yet it was a viral story that every trans influencer and every person that the trans community looks to as one of our defenders ran with. And the problem with running with fake stories is that the fake story will get a lot of attention up front, but the correction will get maybe a tenth of the attention. So I think there are probably a lot of people, maybe even some of you guys, let me know in the comments, who still think that the word transgender is banned from the CDC documents. No, it just never happened.
Mind you, there are a lot of other bad things that have happened since then. Even if this in particular didn't, a lot of other bad things have, and we'll get to those.
Ask CNN, ask anyone, like it didn't happen. Next up, jump.
Also, just, hey fam, you got a problem? Just ask CNN. Just write them a letter and just ask them, because apparently you can do that. Yeah. Just like a small comment, but like come on, Blair, you anyway.
Jump to fall 2018, and this time the big trans everyone be scared headline was that trans people would no longer exist.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let her speak a little bit on this, but then we're gonna talk about this, all right?
Under law. This one came right before midterms because I think if you really pay attention, you'll notice that the most salacious, fear-mongering stories, especially as it relates to certain minority groups, will always come around elections.
Why do you think that is, Blair? Why do you think the most discriminatory or like outrageous headlines come right before election cycles? Why do you think that is? Here's a thought, and you know, it could just be crazy. It could just be, you know, just completely crazy. Here's a, you know, I'm putting on my tinfoil hat. Maybe Trump was trying to appeal to his conservative base because he knows that people who are more conservative just kind of hate trans people. Maybe that's possible. I don't know. I mean, like, you have correctly identified this weird, wacky correlation that just happens to always arise around election cycles, and it seems to always be pushed by people who are more conservative, and it seems to always apply to people who are more conservative or appeal to more conservative audiences. It's just a weird, wacky observation. I don't know. Maybe there's something there. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I'll have to leave that to you. Just saying.
We have Steph Signati doing a video that got hundreds of thousands of views saying trans people will no longer exist. And the gist of it was that trans people would no longer be able to change their gender legally as it pertains to certain documents like birth certificates, driver's license, social security. All those are things that
Hold on. It was actually a lot more in depth than this. So let's talk about it. Here's the actual article that she referenced. And I think I reached out to someone to help me get the link. It was either for this one or for another one. But thank you if you did. So essentially, what happened was that there was a memo that was leaked from inside the executive department, from basically inside the White House, right? The Department of Health and Human Services specifically. And the department argued in its memo that key government agencies needed to adopt an explicit and uniform definition of gender as determined on a biological basis that is clear, grounded in science, objective, and administrable, which is oxymoronic in and of itself, because when we read what they were going to define it as, it's literally unscientific, and we'll talk more about it. The agency's proposed definition would define sex as either male or female, unchangeable, and determined by genders that a person is born with, according to a draft reviewed by the Times. Any dispute about one's sex would have to be clarified using genetic testing. Sex means that a person's status is as male or female based on immutable biological traits identifiable by or before birth, the department proposed in the memo, which was drafted and has been circulated since last spring. The sex listed on a person's birth certificate as originally issued shall constitute definitive proof of a person's sex unless rebutted by reliable genetic evidence. So, let's talk about this, because there's a lot of bullshit here, all right? I'm sorry to say it like that, but it flies in the face of scientific consensus. It really does. Okay, so let's talk about some consensus. So the first issue, because there's two issues here, right? The first issue is, does biological sex determine someone's gender? So the first thing to acknowledge is that according to the American Psychological Association, gender identity refers to a person's internal sense of being male, female, or something else. Gender expression refers to the way a person communicates gender identity to others through behavior, clothing, hairstyles, voice, or body characteristics. Furthermore, according to the United Kingdom's National Health Service, gender identity is defined, quote, to refer to our sense of self and who we are and how we describe ourselves. The NHS explains that most people identify as male or female, which are sometimes called binary identities, but some people feel their gender identity is different from their biological sex. Furthermore, according to the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, and gender-diverse people. It influences how people perceive themselves and each other, how they act and interact, and the distribution of power and resources in society. Gender identity is not confined to a binary, girl-woman, boy-man, nor is it static. It exists along a continuum and can change over time. There is considerable diversity in how individuals and groups understand, experience, and express gender through the roles they take on, the expectations placed on them, relations with each other, and the complex ways that gender is institutionalized in society. The analysis is that gender identity and gender expression are not mutually inclusive with one's biological identity, and therefore biological sex does not determine someone's gender. So that's the first thing. All right, that's the first thing that we need to establish, right? When we're talking about gender and biological sex, one does not determine the other, all right? Period. And then there's another question that evolves, right? There's another question that comes out of that. Well, then it's like, all right, well, what about trying to define specifically what someone's biological sex is? Well, then that brings up the question of, are trans women biologically male, and vice versa for trans men? Here's a graphic from Scientific American describing the many characteristics which factor into one's sexual identity. This shows the ambiguous and bimodal nature of sex, and that sex is not as simple as XX or XY. Biological sex is on a bimodal distribution, not a direct binary. Another publication in Scientific American elaborates on this subject. Sex is supposed to be simple, at least on the molecular level. The biological explanations that appear in textbooks amount to X plus X equals girl and X plus Y equals boy, Venus or Mars, pink or blue. As science looks more closely, however, it becomes increasingly clear that a pair of chromosomes do not always suffice to distinguish boy-girl, either from the standpoint of sex, biological traits, or of gender, social identity. To varying extents, many of us are biological hybrids on a male-female continuum. Researchers have found XY cells in a 94-year-old woman, and surgeons discovered a womb in a 70-year-old man, a father of 4. New evidence suggests that the brain consists of a mosaic of cell types, some more yin, others further along on the yang scale. Additionally, here's a quote from a publication in Sage Journals of the Modern Scientific Attitudes on Human Sex. Quote, The view that the world's population can be separated into a clearly defined dyadic unit of male and female is defunct. Not only clinical observations, but molecular biology has established that sexual identity is on a continuum with enormous potential for variance. Additionally, according to the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, quote, sex refers to a set of biological attributes in humans and animals. It is primarily associated with physical and psychological features, including chromosomes, gene expression, hormone levels, and function. Thank you, appreciate it. And reproductive sexual anatomy. Sex is usually categorized as male or female, but there is variation in the biological attributes that comprise sex and how those attributes are expressed. The analysis of all of this scientific consensus is that the modern scientific consensus is that binary terms like biological male and biological female are, and I'll say it again, scientific fiction. This is because since biological sex is on a spectrum, when we choose to label someone as biologically male or biologically female, that is determined by society, not by science. So when you attempt to present societally constructed terms as empiric authority, it is scientific fiction. And the conclusion is that no, trans women are not biologically male, and vice versa for trans men. Okay? That was a lot. But basically, I wanted to get through all of it. I wanted to get through all of that just to show you, literally, all of this is as unscientific as you can possibly fucking get. And I think it becomes a lot clearer to see that it is primarily just motivated by an intent to discriminate against trans people. That's it. Because as you have correctly identified, Blair, these kinds of stories and these kinds of things often come up during election cycles. And I would make a pretty educated guess that it was brought up during an election cycle to try and help Trump and other people associated with Trump, other more conservative people, so that they would get a lot more support from their base, which, reminder, hates trans people. Just saying. And I know that you might think that you're like the one good one. You're the good tran. But like, and this is hard, and I get this is hard, and a lot of those people, no matter how hard you try to convince them, will never see you for who you are. They won't. They fundamentally won't. And if you're listening to this later on, I really want you to get, I really want this to get through your head. You might get like some people who will say, oh yeah, we accept you, you know, you can be a part of our group, you can be a part of our gang. But like when you look at their actions, and when their actions are specifically trying to get this instituted into our law, those are not your allies. And regardless of whether or not he was actually able to do this, there's enough evidence to show that he tried. And we can explore this with a hypothetical. Tell me, if someone walks up to you and intends to, and holds a gun out and tries to shoot you, but at the last second slips on a banana peel, and they end up missing your head and shoots like past you into the air, would you say that that person isn't that bad of a person because they just happened to miss you? They tried to do it. They tried to shoot you right in the skull, but they just happened to miss. Would you say that that person is still a good person? No, of course not. Regardless of whether or not someone is successful in attempting to kill you, they still tried to. And the fact that they tried is really what makes the thing bad, regardless of whether or not they were successful. Period. Let's go on.
I changed before 2018, but I know an immense amount of people in all states who have changed it since then. This literally just never happened. It just wasn't a thing. I can get into the nitty gritty, but all you need to
Yeah, again, they tried to. It didn't get passed, but they tried to.
know is it didn't happen. But the entirety of the trans community was believing that it did, and all of our influencers were saying that it was true. Very sad. And the problem is that every single time that one of these stories comes out saying that it's the end of trans people, right? Like, I'll know it comes out because my DM is just flooded with young trans people scared and asking me for help and guidance and saying, like, can you please?
I mean, like, I feel like that's pretty justified. Again, going back to the argument earlier, like, I think that the fear is pretty justified. If someone tries to shoot at you and they happen to miss, I think it's reasonable to be scared of that person from then on forward. Or at least worried that, you know, they're going to try and murder you again. I think that's a reasonable fear to have.
Please help. Like, it really does set the community into an emotional uproar. It does. So let's jump to something.
She constantly gets misgendered and called slurs on conservative forums. Interesting. Amazing. It's almost as if they actually don't really care about what she says that she is. The crazy thing is, like, if she came over to the left, or at least like abandoned the right, I feel like she'd be around people who actually like respected her identity and her autonomy and her, you know, being a woman. I feel like Like, life would be so much easier on her. It really would, and it kind of sucks. Like, it is tragic. Here's the thing, and my audience, you might not like this as much, but like, in this sense, I do kind of feel bad for her, because it is fighting a losing battle when you're just trying to win over the people who will never, ever, 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 ever actually see you for who you are. And she might believe that. She might believe that, but like, when you see like people on conservative forums, even today, routinely just like shitting on her and misgendering her and calling her a man and dead naming her, whatever, I think it's pretty easy to see that like her efforts haven't exactly been all that successful. And it sucks. It sucks because as a trans person, I in that sense, I feel sorry for her. And I might get fucking canceled for that, but fuck you, I'm allowed to have some empathy. Let's go on.
Last month, Pride Month, you might have seen that it came out and the new headline was that Trump was removing all healthcare for all trans people.
Okay, hold on. It wasn't all healthcare protections for all trans people, but yeah, like, this headline came out, and mind you, we gonna talk about this shit, all right? Because I had to do a lot. This is the single thing. I had to do the most homework for this, so y'all better fucking appreciate this, all right? This was a labor of love, but let's get into it.
Trans people, that was the big thing, right? So this hit during Pride Month, and not just any Pride Month. It hit during, obviously, June, and even now, July, about to be August. It's a very emotionally heightened time as it pertains to social issues, everything happening in the world, obviously. Like, this type of headline is going to really set people off. The problem is that, again, this didn't happen. I debunked it in an article in the Post Millennial. You can go read.
Blair, I hate to tell you. But you are making an argument to someone who is literally studying law right now. And I can tell you, after doing all the research I have, and after talking to other legal professionals, that you're completely wrong. All right? Now let's talk about this, all right? Because being as charitable as I can, thank you for subscribing. Being as charitable as I can understand why she said the thing that she did. Because mind you, in the article that she wrote, all right, let's see if I can, hold on, did I pull it up? Yeah, so she wrote in the Post Millennial in here, but it's a super short article, right? There's a lot of problems with this from writing from a legal perspective, right? And the first is that she literally doesn't cite like anything. She says that, she cites to this 2016 case, which is a case that happened, and we'll talk more about it. But something that made researching this claim very difficult for me was the fact that she didn't cite anything. She didn't say what the name of the case was, what court it was from. She didn't, like, there's nothing to go on here. And so for a while, I just assumed her to be, like, blatantly wrong. I just assumed this to be a lie, because, like, in legal writing, you have to be able to cite basically to everything. When people look at my, like, for example, when you look at my legal doc, this is the way that lawyers write. I mean, not in like this general way. This is the way that like law students will write for exam purposes, right? Because I cite fucking everything so that no one can ever look at me and be like, that's a pretty wild claim, Riley. Let's see some citations for it. And that's why I give every single citation to things that I say, right? Because I never, ever, 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 ever want someone to be able to have a claim against me to any degree that I'm just talking out my ass, all right? This is the way that lawyers write. And she literally did not include a single goddamn citation in all of this. And I'm sorry. I'm treating you in good faith. And the reason why I can see this, the reason why I can see what you said, is because I think that the entirety of your research was going to the HHS website. All right? And once I saw this, I was like, okay, I can see why she says the things that she does. Because this covers, like, this is on the HHS website. This is the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It's in the administrative branch. It's under the operation of the Trump administration, right? So keep that in mind. This is what they have on their website. Okay, move this over so that people can read. In Section 1557, Congress prohibited coverage. On the basis of, one of those federal statutes in Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, or Title IX, prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sex in certain federally funded programs. In 2016, the previous administration issued a regulation implementing Section 1557, that redefines sex discrimination to include termination of pregnancy and gender identity, which is defined as, quote, one's internal sense of gender, which may be male, female, neither, or a combination of male and female. Pretty based. Honestly, like, oh, you can say whatever you want about the Obama administration, but this was pretty fucking based, right? Like, this was a good thing that existed, all right? Whether or not you agree with the rest of the Obama administration, this was a good, okay? And here, all right, is what happened in 2016, which is what Blair vaguely references in her article. On December 31st of 2016, a federal court preliminarily enjoined, on a nationwide basis, the prior administration's attempt to redefine sex discrimination in the 2016 rule, concluding that the provisions were likely contrary to applicable civil rights law, the Religious Freedom Act, Restoration Act, and the Administrative Procedure Act. A second federal court agreed on October 5th of 2019. The first federal court issued a final judgment and vacated and remanded these provisions as unlawful. This final ruling is binding on HHS. Notice, this is particular language that they have to legally include. All right? So take note of that. But I actually missed that in my first reading. HHS has not been able to enforce these provisions since December 2016. And the provisions have been vacated since October 2019. So when I read this, okay, I actually thought Blair was right on this. For a moment, I was about to like tip my hat and be like, Blair, you know what? I had an understanding that appears to be incorrect. I'll give this to you. But I decided to reach out to some people. And actually, who I mentioned in my past stream, actually, that I attended a event this past week called Lavender Law, which is the national conference held every year for the LGBT Bar Association, right? It is the conference where all of the most renowned legal professionals who do LGBT plus advocacy assemble and talk about various legal issues. And fortunately, I was actually able to talk to and email on this particular subject Drew Lavassier. I think that's how you pronounce it. My French isn't great. Just to talk a little bit about him, Drew Lavassier serves as the Deputy Program Director for the National LGBT Bar, working to deepen the bar's programmatic work, or work around the country and increase outreach to and education for constituencies, including law schools and students, law firms, and corporations. Pretty reputable dude. Pretty, like, this is, if you want to know something about the law as it pertains to LGBT people, this is who you go to. And I reached out to him and I basically asked him, right? I'm not going to show you the email because it has personal information and it's through my, like, school's email, right? But what he told me, what he directed me to was a source on the National Center for Transgender Equality's website when they actually wrote about this back when it happened in 2016. And what he summarized to me, and we can go through this article a little bit just to explain it, but basically what happened, again, going back to the specific language on the HHS website, this ruling was binding on the HHS and only the HHS. What this does not say is that for the entirety of the time, from 2016 up to when the Trump administration implemented this rule, trans people, acting in their own personal capacity, were able to bring lawsuits under this rule. We still were able to defend ourselves in the court of law. We just couldn't count on the HHS to do the work for us. It's not that we lost the protections under the rule when the court enjoined this rule in 2016. It's just that they prevented the HHS from being able to do something, but we still could. If we went to a hospital and people discriminated against us on the basis of our gender identity, we could still have sued them under this rule as it existed in the Obama administration. We had those protections. That's timely. Most judges, including several federal appeals courts, have agreed that federal laws like Title IX education law and Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act protect transgender people from discrimination. However, in this case, a single judge in Texas ruled that HHS cannot enforce those protections anywhere in the country. The judge's orders apply nationwide, but only to enforcement by the HHS itself. The judge's orders do not and cannot prevent transgender people from filing lawsuits alleging discrimination by healthcare providers or insurers. So Blair, this is wrong. This is blatantly wrong. It's so wrong that it's actually kind of like I worry about you and someone coming after you with like some legal action, because this is like skating really close to the sun of giving legal advice. And if someone were to suffer discrimination and thought that because of reading this and seeing what you said, that they had no recourse under the law and you prevented them from being able to file a timely lawsuit, there are potentially legal repercussions for that. And that's a little scary, I would think. But I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a law student, I'm just expressing my concerns, and I'm basically representing to you the same things that I have to deal with when I represent to other people legal information or interpretations of the law. What you have presented is a blatantly wrong interpretation of the law. It is so wrong that it's actually, like, it shocks my conscience that you put this out and you actually thought that this was, like, representative of what is the current legal analysis. But I can see why you said it. If the totality of your legal research was to look at the HHS website, because that's what it might lead someone who doesn't know the law as well to believe. But this is the reason why it is so important. Oh shit, I'll read that in a second. But this is the reason why it's so important to make sure that we're actually talking to, and get this, actual legal professionals. Like people from the LGBT bar. I can guarantee you, if you would have just like reached out to them and asked for their legal professional opinion, it's funny because that's literally all I had to do, you might have been able to get somewhere. So this is wrong. And Trump did take away our legal protections. He did. He did. As much as you might want to not believe it, like this is an open act of discrimination by the Trump administration against us. And I would say that's pretty bad. Let's go on.
That and get every single detail. But the long and short of it is that these protections that were supposedly being repealed that protected trans people were never actually set in place. They were actually proposed and then struck down before Trump ever took office. Like, this isn't even a defense of Trump. This isn't even a defense
Again, no.
of anything. This is just literally the media emotionally manipulating trans people and people who care about trans people into thinking something is happening when it's really not. These protections were struck down in court before he was president. How can he repeal something that never was put in place? It doesn't make sense. But it was too perfect of a storm to come out during Pride Month, one of the craziest Pride months ever, obviously, 2020. And people were just not, and they might still not, be prepared to hear or ready to accept that that wasn't the whole truth. Or really, that wasn't the truth at all. Healthcare, as it pertains to trans people, is exactly the same as it was last year, the year before that, the year before that. But once again, the emotions of the trans community and the people who care about us and the clicks that we provide is just way too great for the media to pass up.
Blair, I can tell you that if you were bar certified, this would probably be grounds for like having you disbarred. That's how bad this is. Like, this is so bad. This is so bad that if you are actually a practicing legal attorney or professional, people would bring claims that you should be disbarred for this. I can almost guarantee it. And it also sucks because you try to morally impugn the trans community as being like too emotional about it. Yeah. You took away our fucking civil rights protections under healthcare. We have no more fucking federal healthcare protections. We have none. We used to have them, and now we don't. If you don't live in a state where you have federal healthcare protections, there's nothing for you. There's nothing. And it's sad because there will be some people who believe this. And that's the really sad thing, is that a lot of people look up to you and expect you to be trustworthy and respectable and knowledgeable, and you are just blatantly misleading them here.
Doesn't really matter if it's not true. They're still gonna run with it. And it sucks. So let's get into how Trump feels about trans people. Now, anyone can only speculate. Like, no one knows how someone really feels.
Okay. Dear Blair, try knowing anything about trans issues. Sincerely, the trans community. All right, so she's gonna get into like how Trump feels. Again, I've explained this on my channel before. this is the distinction between objective and subjective analysis. Now, mind you, subjective opinions are well, fine, and good, right? Like, there's actually a cool discussion probably about like what it means to be a woman or a man or some other gender in a objective and a subjective sense. Talked about that before. But when we're looking at other people, I never focus on the subjective analysis. I don't really care what someone believes. If they do things which are transphobic or harmful to the trans community, really they are just as bad as someone who intends to do that and they are doing it with malicious or transphobic intent, even if they aren't acting necessarily with them themselves. And yeah, I'd say that like banning us from the military for a reason that doesn't stand up to scrutiny, and also like just taking away our healthcare protections under federal law, like just doing that for no reason other than probably to try and either pursue bigoted beliefs or try to appeal to a bigoted audience, whichever he's trying to go for. Both of those are pretty bad. I would say those are pretty bad. Those are the big bad.
Fields, right? My gut and everything I've seen over the past 4 years, which keep in mind, I am very plugged into trans issues. Obviously, it's my career, it's my life.
If you were more plugged in, then you say that you're plugged in, and yet you've been blatantly wrong in multiple cases or multiple instances throughout this. I'm not trying to morally impugn you, but like, if you're saying that you're credible, if you're trying to make out your credibility or establish credibility that people should believe you, then you better damn well not mislead them when people put their trust in you.
Like, I've watched every news story coming out about trans people since he took office. My gut is that he probably doesn't really know what transgenderism is, at least not to the extent for which it exists in 2020, like what people think of it now. What likely is the case is that transgenderism is such a culture war hot button issue that I feel that the instance of like the trans military ban, I feel like he could have won his whole presidency without doing that and none of his base would have complained. But it was red meat to the segment of his base that maybe does feel a certain way about trans people, and so I feel that he did.
Also, Blair, you're talking about his base. Newsflash, that's your base too. You appeal to a conservative audience. That's your base that you're talking about. It's yours. Like those are the people, the same people that follow you are the same people that want Trump in office. Okay? I don't know what else to say to like get this through to your head. Like you say this, and this is one of those things that makes me wonder, that makes me more inclined to believe that you actually believe the things that you're saying, because like I don't think that anyone who had like any like substantive like, I think that you want to believe that your audience doesn't include the people who actually like just hate trans people, but like it probably does, and probably in larger numbers than you think. And I really want you to realize that, but I can't do, I can only lead you to water. I cannot make you drink it.
That partly, at least, because it gave his base something that they can say, oh, good job on. I don't think he had to do that. I feel like it was unnecessary, 110%. Like, call me pessimistic, but I really don't feel that those in the media and in politics have like a true, like, genuine care, and that includes Trump, like a genuine care about the trans issue. I think for most people, whether it be Trump,
again, it doesn't really matter for me. I look at someone's actions and the things that they say, and like, he has done terrible things to the trans community. That's really it.
whether it be the media, whether it be all the talking heads and figureheads that are coming up in your mind right now, I think it's just one of those things that is simply another issue to battle on and virtue signal about for both sides. I think that Trump has a base that wants to be fed certain lines about the transgender topic, and he will occasionally feed them that, and I think that that's really the extent of how
Okay, so I think that she's just kind of speculating. Also, another thing, just to point out, because she actually didn't bring it up in her video. Let's see. Oh yeah, this is something else that's happened recently that Trump has done. Just kind of like a cherry on top. The Trump administration, this is something that's happening right now, is moving to repeal transgender protections in homeless shelters. Because, you know, that's definitely the priority of the president, is to repeal the protections of homeless people, especially trans homeless people. Yeah, so the HUD proposed it would reverse 2016 measure implemented under the Obama administration. Again, whatever you want to say about the Obama administration, they did this a good. They did this a good. That built on provisions enacting 4 years earlier. Mandated that shelters are open to all eligible individuals and families regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status. And the administration issued further guidance clarifying that the rule barred shelters from denying access to trans people in accordance with their gender identity. HUD announced Wednesday that intended to effectively strike the 2016 trans inclusive guidelines. Yeah. When it comes to housing transgender people in single-sex or sex-segregated shelters, HUD Secretary Ben Carson said in a statement that the Obama administration guidelines mandate a single approach that overrides local laws and concerns. And they tried to make an appeal to basically... we could actually... So there's a Vox article that talks a lot about like the specifics of it, and it basically like outlines how to spot a trans woman, right? Like, let's look at some of the language. The copy of the rule obtained by Vox has already passed congressional review, according to several sources familiar with the process, which is one of the many steps needed before the text is released publicly. When asked about the text and status of the rule, HUD pointed Vox to their July 1st press release. The rule's language, according to the leaked text, states that single-sex shelter staff may determine an individual's sex based on a good faith belief that an individual seeking access to the temporary emergency shelters is not of the sex as defined in the single-sex facilities policy, which the facility accommodates. In order to do this, HUD will allow the shelter staff to take into account factors such as height, the presence but not absence of facial hair, the presence of an Adam's apple, and other physical characteristics which, when taken together, are indicative of a person's biological sex. So yeah, no, the Trump administration not only is trying to just like shit on homeless trans people, which I would say is a pretty fucking low blow personally, but also is just like actually spelling out how people can clock trans women. What can I say but yikes? Yeah. So you don't talk about this in your video, but just like when we're talking about things that the Trump administration is doing to trans people, that's also relevant. I don't know why you didn't consider it. Maybe it's because they're homeless and you're not as concerned with homeless people. I don't know. I don't. But yeah, that's also a pretty yikesy thing that's happened pretty recently.
How he feels. I find that some people on the right have a misconception that transgenderism is an invention of the political left or a consequence of gender studies rather than a phenomenon that has been around for.
Yeah, so, I mean, we've already talked about like all the medical scientific basis for gender and gender identity and trans people and all that.
A very long time, if not forever, and likely isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And it is real people. I think like in the minds of people who have never met a trans person, like all they know is what they hear from the media and on social media. It's just like something invented by the left. It's just like a political thing. So I do feel that's probably how Trump feels. I do. I mean, there really exists no interviews where Trump explicitly discusses transgender people. So I don't really know how he feels. And I feel like everyone kind of wants me to know how he feels and talk about it. I don't know.
Stretching out that runtime now.
I understand it in other ways. But other than that, a lot of these headlines that come out turn out to not even be real. So I don't really know how to...
You've talked about maybe two that have come out that have not been real. I'll grant you that. But like the pretty big ones, the ban on trans people being in the military and taking away our, and I repeat, fucking federal health protections against discrimination. Yeah, those are things that happened. Those are rules that exist now. They exist. It's done. It's not even hypothetical. It's happened. It's time to accept that Trump is a piece of shit. That whether or not, regardless of his intentions, just kind of want to shit on trans people. That's where we're at. It's not hypothetical. Like it's happened. I don't know what to say at this point.
What if you have the time? The other thing that I think is important to mention is that, you know, I care about trans issues, and if you're watching this as a supporter of mine, you probably care at least a little bit, unless you're, you know...
Again, Blair, you are... I'm really trying hard to take you in good faith, but like when you say that you're a supporter of trans issues and you regularly spread like such blatant misinformation, it's really, really hard to believe it, right? I am trying my best. I am trying my best, but you're making it really tough on me. Yeah.
Subscribe to me for another reason, but I think sometimes when you care and you're invested deeply into an issue, you kind of, your judgment is clouded as to the extent for which the entire world cares. And I also feel like trans issues in the grand scheme of the world are not like the most important thing. Like they're important to me, don't get me wrong, and I think they should be more important to more people, but I don't know.
I mean, like they're important to trans people. Like they are important. I like, you know, having protections against discrimination. That's nice. I like those things. I think they're pretty cool actually. Like civil rights. Yeah, that's something I care about. But I get what you're saying. Like, it doesn't make sense that they... Well, I mean, like, it makes sense politically that he cares about it because, like, regardless of whether you want it to be or not, it's a politicized issue in 2020, and people will vote based on the actions that he takes according to it. That's where we're at. And unfortunately, you're on the wrong side of that, right? Like, if you want to be on the side that's actually advocating for trans rights, it's not conservative. Like, conservatives aren't doing that. They, like, the one party is singularly responsible for proposing every single anti-trans bit of legislation fucking ever in the United States. It's not the Democrats. And that's not saying I love the Democrats, but fuck, if you're trying to lay blame against a political party, there's clearly a culprit.
Oh, I will say, if anyone's watching, you can hook it up. I would love to interview the president, talk to the president on camera, possibly, pick his brain a little bit.
Is this like, oh, hold on. Is this like her trying... Blair, is this just you trying to shill to Republicans so you can get an interview with the president? Is that what it is? Like, oh my god. Oh my god. Good faith. You can do it, Riley. You can do it. I believe in you. I believe in you. I believe in you. Okay. Yeah, for real. I think that's really all that there is to it. I feel like she's just chilling. Or just, again. All right, I'm gonna say my bit. All right, Blair. Hi, how you doing? So listen, Calvin, in case you are unaware, again, I said it earlier, in case you are unaware, has told me that he is a fan of yours, that he believes you are fundamentally a good person. Okay? I could have gone in a lot harder. I could have gone in a lot harder on you in this, because there are multiple times where you are just blatantly wrong. And, like, grievously, irresponsibly so. To the point where you could have caused, like, there is a potential that you could have caused, like, multiple trans people who have been discriminated against to not realize that they have protections under our law, and to not take recourse under the, like, a statute of limitations that would permit it. That's not good. That's a very, very bad thing. A bad thing indeed. But because Calvin believes that you are a good person, I am using this as an opportunity to educate you. And if you ever want to talk, then I will come in with the best faith. I have been very critical of you before. All right? I have. Because you have said equally heavily objectionable things in the past. Okay? You have. But if you genuinely represented what were your authentic beliefs, and you take what I have said, and you incorporate them, and you take some action to, like, make sure that your fans don't have an inauthentic understanding of, like, our current legal rights or the history of them, like, we can talk. I believe in anyone's fundamental ability to change. Going back to the hypothetical at the beginning, I'm going to talk about this a little bit, all right? A lot of people, and I think justifiably so, would believe that since you have acted and since you have platformed ideas in such a way as you have for as long a time as you have, that there is no way that you could change, all right? That you're just done, that there's no talking to you, that you're just a lost cause and we might as well all just dunk on you. And I have dunked on you before, right? I'm not going to excuse myself in that regard. I would say it's justified, but I have done it as well. But I also would be logically remiss if I were to say that it were impossible for you to change. Because like the people in the opening hypotheticals, just because you brush your teeth every morning does not mean that it's with certainty that you're going to brush your teeth every morning. People change, or people forget, or maybe you live in fucking Britain where they only brush your teeth once a month. I don't know. But then to the bullying example, I would make the case that that is different from the brushing teeth example, because when you bully someone, when you do something harmful, eventually people grow up and they realize that actually it's wrong to hurt others. And that's the fundamental difference between just brushing your teeth, which is something which is immoral, or like absence of morals. It's just something that people do, and it's something that people probably do throughout the entirety of their life. And when people do something like bully others as a child, most people, most reasonable people, will eventually come to realize that was pretty shitty behavior and that they should change it. And that's something that happens. And so I acknowledge there is a capacity for you to change. I acknowledge that there is a capacity for you to be able to engage in good faith discussion. People who follow me and other people on the left will say that that does not exist, or if it is existent, it is minimal at best. All right? And I don't know how much that's true. All right? I can't read your mind. I can't. I can only go off of what I know. But if you actually want to have a discussion, for real, then hit me up. All right? And we will make it happen. And I will be canceled in the dirt for it. Listen, this everyone that I'm watching, I'm sorry. This is the end of the beginning of the end of my channel. When I'm nuked into the dirt. Right? But you know what? If it actually creates meaningful change, then I think that's worth it. I think that's worth taking the shot.